Welcome to Dr. Speculate, where we explore the dark and mystery events and human psychology. Today, we're going to delve into a topic that's both disturbing and fascinating. We're talking about Munchausen Syndrome by proxy, a condition where a caregiver, usually a parent or guardian, fabricates or induces illnesses in their child to gain attention and sympathy for themselves. Munchausen Syndrome by proxy is a form of child abuse that's difficult to detect. It's estimated that between 1% and 5% of all childhood illnesses are fabricated or induced by caregivers. The most common victims are children under the age of 6, but it can also occur in older children and even adults. According to Dr. Mark Feldman, a leading expert on Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the condition is characterized by three key factors: the caregiver's need for attention and sympathy, their lack of empathy for the child suffering, and their ability to manipulate medical professionals. One of the most disturbing cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy is that of Lacey Schmidt, a mother who was convicted of poisoning her son with a lethal dose of salt. The child, who was only 5 years old at the time, suffered from seizures and paralysis as a result of his mother's actions. Schmidt's motivation for inducing illness in her child was to gain attention and sympathy from medical professionals and her community. She had previously been involved in a similar case with her daughter, who had also suffered from fabricated illnesses. In 2015, Lacey Schmidt, then 27 years old, was convicted for the murder of her son after a harrowing trial that revealed her calculated and cruel behavior. Medical experts testified that Schmidt deliberately administered lethal doses of salt to her son through his feeding tube, all while presenting herself as a dedicated and caring mother. As of 2024, Spears remains incarcerated at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. She will be eligible for parole no earlier than June 12, 2034. One of the most infamous and deeply disturbing cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy is that of D.D. Blanchard, a mother who subjected her daughter, Gypsy Rose, to years of fabricated illnesses, invasive medical procedures, and emotional manipulation. D.D.'s motivations were twofold. On one hand, she craved the constant attention and sympathy that came from being perceived as the selfless, devoted caregiver of a terminally ill child. On the other hand, she exploited Gypsy's fabricated conditions for financial gain, collecting thousands of dollars in disability benefits, charitable donations, and even a house provided by Habitat for Humanity. From the time Gypsy was a baby, Dee orchestrated a campaign of deceit. She convinced doctors and caregivers that Gypsy suffered from a long list of severe medical conditions, including leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and developmental delays. Despite evidence that Gypsy was perfectly healthy, Dee manipulated and intimidated medical professionals, often switching doctors and falsifying medical records to ensure that her narrative remained unquestioned. What made Dee Blanchard's case so chilling was the sheer extent of her control over Gypsy. Dee isolated her daughter from the outside world, restricting her access to education, social interaction, and even her own autonomy. Gypsy was confined to a wheelchair despite being able to walk, forced to use a feeding tube she didn't need, and subjected to unnecessary surgeries and treatments, including the removal of her salivary glands. For years, Dee maintained a facade of being a devoted mother, receiving accolades and public sympathy. Gypsy, however, was living a nightmare. She later described how her mother's control extended to every aspect of her life, from what she ate to who she spoke to, even monitoring her interactions with doctors to ensure the lies remained intact. Dee's actions are a textbook example of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She thrived on the attention and sympathy that came from presenting herself as a heroic mother. The psychological toll on Gypsy was immense. She was not only physically abused, but emotionally conditioned to believe she was truly ill and dependent on her mother for survival. The cycle of abuse finally came to a tragic end in 2015, when Gypsy, then 23 years old, conspired with her online boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, to murder her mother. The killing, which was initially shrouded in mystery, revealed the shocking extent of Dee Dee's abuse and the desperation that drove Gypsy to escape. Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a sentence many viewed as lenient given the circumstances. Meanwhile, Nicholas Godejohn was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Their case sparked widespread debate about the complex dynamics of abuse, coercion, and criminal accountability. Gypsy's story raised critical questions about how cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy are detected and addressed. Experts have noted that while Dee Dee's behavior raised some red flags, the complexity of the medical lies and Dee Dee's manipulative nature made it difficult for doctors, neighbors, and even family members to intervene. This case is a wake-up call for everyone involved in child welfare. Medical professionals need to be trained to recognize patterns of fabricated illness, such as repeated hospital visits, conflicting medical reports, and symptoms that only appear under the caregiver's supervision. Equally important is empowering children to voice their concerns and creating systems where they can be heard without fear of retribution. Today, Gypsy remains incarcerated, but has expressed relief at being free from her mother's control. Her case continues to be a focal point for discussions about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, domestic abuse, and the fine line between victimhood and accountability. The tragic cases reminds us of the unseen dangers of abuse disguised as care. It underscores the importance of vigilance in identifying and addressing Munchausen syndrome by proxy, not only to protect the victims, but to hold the perpetrators accountable. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a disturbing condition that highlights the darker side of human nature. It's essential to be aware of the warning signs and take action if we suspect someone may be suffering from this condition. Thanks for watching, Dr. Speculate. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest videos.